We're going to talk about some fun topics this week: assisted reproduction, multiple gestation, surrogacy, and elderly parents. And I don't mean that parents who are old, but I mean people who become parents at an advanced age. And that's what we're going to talk about this week. So I don't know, you may or may not remember some of the more famous cases in multiple gestation, particularly, and assisted reproduction. Can't have one without the other, or you can, but very rare to have one without the other. But one was the so-called Octomom, Nadia Suleiman. We'll talk about her in a second, and then also John and Kate Goslin. But first, let's talk about Nadia Suleiman. So it was 2008. She was 32 years old, from California. She had previously had in vitro fertilization from treatments, and she had 6 embryos that were left over. And this was left over with her physician, Michael Kamrava. She didn't want those remaining embryos destroyed. She had what she claimed to be an ethical issue with that. She didn't want those embryos destroyed. So she underwent another cycle of in vitro fertilization to have all of them implanted. So she had all of the 6 remaining ones implanted. 2 of those 6 embryos that were implanted split into twins, resulting in a total of 8 embryos. So when those sonograms in the first trimester revealed that there were at least 5 fetuses at the time, she refused reduction, so she wouldn't have any of them removed. And on January 26th, her doctors delivered 8 babies. There was a lot of criticism that was focused on her doctor, who implanted her not once, but twice with 6 embryos. She had 6 children at home already when this happened. So he certainly breached the guidelines of the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, which recommends implantation of ideally just 1 embryo and possibly 2. Because she already had children from previous cycles of in vitro fertilization, and 2 of those children had disabilities, for that doctor to implant 6 more embryos was unethical and likely created more children with disabilities. Nadia tried to get her own reality show. That didn't happen. She began to work occasionally in the adult entertainment business. That didn't really work out. In 2012, she filed for bankruptcy. Ultimately, her home, her $1 million home, was auctioned off. Her children lived on public assistance, and she spent a month in rehab due to an addiction to Xanax. So, she's got quite a story. You're going to explore that a little bit more in a couple minutes. In 2009, there was another situation involving multiple gestations, and that was John and Kate Goslin, and they lived in Pennsylvania. She was a labor and delivery nurse. He's a network engineer. They were married in 2001, and they already had a family of twin girls that were born in 2001 from artificial insemination from her husband. So artificial insemination, husband sperm. So in 2004, they gave birth to sextuplets, 3 girls and 3 boys. The fertility doctors in this case started the sextuplets by injecting Kate with drugs to stimulate her ovaries, and then introduced John's sperm. And we'll talk about this in a little bit. They were informed that there were 6 pregnancies. They chose not to reduce. All 6 babies were delivered by cesarean section in 2004. They started a reality show. I don't know if you've heard, John and Kate Plus 8, that basically filmed the controlled chaos of this family of 10, because, as I said, they already had 2 children at home, and it became a hit in 2007 on cable. So putting these kids on television glamorized these multiple births. After the birth, the plastic surgeon did free plastic surgery to correct the distortion of her stomach from having 6 babies. In 2009, they both had extramarital affairs, got divorced. John kind of abandoned his responsibilities as a father. Both acted really immaturely. Neither one of them really focused on the best interest of their 8 children. Kate went on Dancing with the Stars in 2010. She had the kids on reality TV shows. Twist of Kate was one. She had Kate Plus 8. But in 2011, the shows were canceled, and after that, she scrambled as a single mother with 8 children, trying to support them. So those are some of the issues that we're going to talk about this week. Is who should be responsible for supporting these children of multiple gestations. What I have here is kind of the Natalie. I don't know why I have Natalie there, but the Nadia should say Suleiman story. So it's a little bit about they're brief news articles that I want you to access and read that kind of go through her history. So from the waiting for the octuplets, then the birth of the octuplets, the doctor being charged or accused of negligence, mom getting money as a result of a disability. So all this while, mom is out on disability. She's able enough to carry 8 babies, but she's out on disability. The doctor saying that he was wrong in doing this procedure. The doctor ultimately having his license revoked. So the doctor's license was revoked. He's tried multiple times to try to get it back unsuccessfully. A story about her being back on food stamps again. So who's paying for these children? She files for bankruptcy, owes lots of rent, ends up in rehab because of her anxiety and stress. She pleads guilty to welfare fraud. And then this last little thing is a YouTube video of kind of a where are they now. So just a little update since this was 2009 when they were born. So it should be Nadia Suleiman, her story. So let's talk about in vitro fertilization a little bit. Test tube conception is what we call is the popular name for in vitro fertilization, particularly when I was younger. In vitro literally means in glass. So it involves fertilization outside of the outside of the womb, no womb at the end, in a petri dish. They don't really do that now. The fertilization actually occurs inside the woman close to the way it naturally happens. But back when it first started, it was happening in petri dishes. So a woman named Leslie Brown was the mother of the first child that was conceived by in vitro fertilization. She had damaged fallopian tubes because she had a number of ectopic pregnancies. So those are pregnancies that the egg is fertilized within the fallopian tube, and it can be dangerous to the mother. The egg is not viable. So she had a number of these. Her fallopian tubes were damaged. So for her, in vitro fertilization scientists removed one of her eggs, put it in a petri dish where they mixed in her husband's sperm to form an embryo. They then returned the embryo back to her uterus, and she carried it through a normal gestation. So a woman has all of her eggs at birth, but only one egg is typically primed for conception each month. There are drugs, Clomid and Pergonal, that stimulate the ovaries to release more than one egg, which increases the likelihood of more than one egg being fertilized. And that's called superovulation. So after about a year of trying, about one married couple in 11 or one couple in 11 can't conceive a child. So there are a lot of reasons that this happens, and fertility can be as a result of many factors. It can be a woman's age. It can be damage from pelvic inflammatory disease. It could be that she's had previous abortions. There are uterine abnormalities, low sperm count, low sperm motility. So many reasons that this can happen. It's often blamed on the woman, but men account for 50% of the infertility problems. So there was a doctor named Robert Edwards who had done extensive research. He was a physiologist at Cambridge, and his work with mice in the 1950s taught him how to balance hormones to induce ovulation. So it was 1965, which was 13 years before Louise Brown was born, he created a human embryo after adding his own semen to a ripe human egg in a petri dish. What he was doing is he was fulfilling one of the greatest fears about scientists, that there would be these lone scientists late at night in these darkened lab artificially creating human life. Think Frankenstein. That's what they were afraid of back then, and they're taking the mystery out of creation. So because of the time and the perception of what it was back then, he knew people would be afraid of what he had accomplished, so he destroyed the embryo. He had tried later on to try to repeat it, but he wasn't able to. And at that time, he didn't tell anybody what he had done for this fear. So to continue with his research, he needed to create lots of embryos. And then what he would do is he would take them from the healthiest of the uterus. So he needed eggs from female volunteers. And that's where he encountered Patrick Steptoe, who was a gynecological surgeon who was practicing in a small hospital near Manchester, and they became partners. And Dr. Steptoe used a laparoscope, which was new. It's standard medical equipment today. It's a long tube with a lens and a light, and he used this laparoscope, which was just created at that point, to remove the eggs. So over about the next 10 years, they attempted in vitro fertilization many times. In the first phase of it, they implanted an embryo 41 times in the fallopian tube, but it never got any further than that. Then they recruited 100 infertile volunteers and implanted an embryo directly into each of their uterus. It was the 102nd attempt that resulted in Louise Brown. So it was in 1977 that Dr. Steptoe told Leslie Brown that she was pregnant. So before this, some women had had eggs successfully fertilized in vitro, but they had all lost the embryo. When Leslie had made it to 5 months of pregnancy and her amniocentesis showed a normal pregnancy, because they had an agreement that if it was an abnormal pregnancy, that it would be aborted. She spent the last month of her pregnancy in the hospital, and she was just inundated by media. So Dr. Steptoe delivered the baby girl, cesarean section, July 25th, 1978. And he did it again. He did it kind of at night. He tried to have as few people present. He didn't want the media there. Louise was born 5 pounds, 12 ounces. Her father said she was beautiful, marvelous complexion, not red and wrinkly at all. And he really expressed, that there's a quote from Dad who said, for a person who's been told he and his wife can never have children, the pregnancy was like a miracle. I felt 12 feet high. The media grabbed onto this, the London newspapers, and I remember seeing the headlines at the time. Not that I was in London, but they showed them here. It's a girl, the lovely Louise, baby of the century, joy to the world. So people were really excited because this had not been accomplished prior to that. It was about 10 years later that Dr. Steptoe died, and it was a week before Queen Elizabeth was going to have him knighted at Buckingham Palace for these accomplishments. In the same week, Robert Edwards became a Fellow of the Royal Society, which is an honor for English scientific community. The Browns decided to have another child, Natalie, that's probably where I got the Natalie from, by in vitro fertilization in 1982. It was about that point that they were widely seen on American television supporting research in assisted reproduction. Just to update on Louise's life, she was married in 2004. Edwards was at her wedding. She had a son, naturally conceived, in 2006, and Dr. Edwards died in 2013. So that's just a little bit on them. I'm going to stop for now.